And good evening. Welcome to yet another episode of Territories Talk. And tonight, we have very special guests from around the region, Montserrat, Virgin Islands, two from Montserrat. And Madam Speaker will be your main host for tonight. We want to thank our media partners, Cayman Marl, Radio Montserrat, Radio Turks from Caicos Island, Channel 82 in Bermuda, CBN Radio in Virgin Islands, and PJFE in Saba. Madam Speaker,
Thank you, Chris. Thank you.
you have the floor.
Thank you. Good evening to everyone. Welcome to Territories Talk for today, Wednesday, October 18th. Our focus today is education in the region. Education in the region, which means education for each of us specifically within our individual territories. And although we are we are coming out of the overseas territories, British overseas territories, our work on this particular program extends through all of the Caribbean territories: English, French, Dutch, Spanish, all of us. We are one Caribbean people, and we see, those of us on Territories Talk see our future, our destiny connected, completely, totally connected. So I want to begin by introducing our guests. And because I'm from Montserrat and I'm hosting today, I will introduce our other guests from the Virgin Islands first. That's what we do, Grace, right? We introduce our guests first and then home next. So we have with us Ms. Olandette Crabbe, who is the Acting Chief Education Officer for the Virgin Islands, which are sometimes called the British Virgin Islands, to distinguish them from the United States Virgin Islands.
Correct.
And then we have Ms. Grayston Castle, who is the head of the UE campus, UE Montserrat site, open campus. And we are going to talk about education in the individual territory, well, specifically the Virgin Islands today. And we're also going to talk, primary and secondary education, and also we'll talk about tertiary education, because ultimately the goal is to go right through the whole spectrum of education and ongoing education, lifelong education. Focus on the notion that education is a lifelong process, and it is what is going to pull us all out and through. It is still true, like Sparrow said, that without an education in your head, etc., etc. Remember that, Calypso? So let me begin with you, Olandette. Let me ask you, give us a quick rundown of what's happening with education in the Virgin Islands. I know that lots of us are struggling with the new rules, new prospects, new opportunities, and all this information that is everywhere available through everything from smartphones to, literally the ethers, it seems. So what's going on with education in the Virgin Islands? How are you doing?
Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for having me. I was hoping that you would sing the rest of the song, because I don't know that song from Sparrow. My mother would not be pleased. But I think I've heard it before, but I can't remember the lyrics.
Children go to school and learn well. Otherwise, later on in life, you're going to catch
Yes. That's it. So education in the Virgin Islands. It's an exciting time for education in the Virgin Islands, because we have, this is our second year where we have embarked on a mission to reimagine education in the Virgin Islands. And so what that entails is a whole restructuring of our education system. It's a process that we've been going through. Last year, we spent a lot of time sort of getting persons acclimatized to the change. We are introducing STEAM education, which represents science, technology, engineering, the arts, and a focus on mathematics. And so we believe that through those tenets, we can expose our children to the kind of critical thinking and logical reasoning, collaboration, creativity, so that they are prepared for the professions that the world, that you and I can't even conceptualize, but that, the future needs. So we have a system that starts with kindergarten. Our students come in at about 4.5, which is typical in the region. And we recently in the last 6 or 7 years, we added what we call 12th grade, which equates to a sixth form in some ways in the region. But we added that year recently to help our senior students be better prepared for their CSEC exams and so on and so forth.
Excellent. Let me just, before we go any further, let me just ask you something, because you said STEAM, and a lot of my work is with girls, and I know how STEM, we've had these difficulties with STEM and girls, because we still, in much of the world, believe that girls just don't naturally do engineering and mathematics and so on. And so it's interesting that you have put arts in the middle of that. Tell me how that came about and why. What was the reasoning behind that, and how is it working?
Well, the STEM has evolved to include STEAM, so that wasn't specific to the Virgin Islands. And the arts includes the literary arts as well as visual arts and the performing arts. Just this year, we've added theater arts to our junior secondary program, and we have had real good reviews from the students with regards to the inclusion of that subject. So we find that through the arts, through expression, through the development of those creative skills, it links everything together and helps the student to be a well-rounded student.
Yeah. And that's one of the issues we have in Montserrat. I mean, Grace is a University of West Indies. She's not school, but Grace also was the chief librarian in Montserrat. I call her Grace.
No. I've never been the chief librarian.
She was a librarian. What were you? She was a librarian. Okay.
I worked with a team. There was the chief librarian, Jane Grell, who lives in Anguilla, and then Ruth Allen. And I was responsible for more the documentation center and services to the public sector. But interestingly, Sir Howard, my predecessor, who was head of the UWI School of Continuing Studies, he invited me he had an opportunity to go to a workshop, and he passed on the opportunity to me, and I kept saying, but I'm not in education. And he said, libraries are about education. And I'm going to tell you, I went to that meeting and my eyes were opened. I met Didicus Jules, who is now with the OECS Commission.
Yeah.
And a lovely, wonderful woman from Bermuda. And they were sharing their experiences with adult education. And I returned home and I said to the economic unit, we need to get these people here. And they asked me to just write up a project proposal. And eventually those two came to Montserrat, and we had a whole week of discussions about how adult education could revolutionize the whole education sector for those persons who the system would have failed. And I started looking at education differently. My problem is that my mother was a teacher and I didn't want to be a teacher.
Sounds like me.
and it's really weird that I've ended up in education. And what I realize is that I'm always observing how things are happening, how people learn. And in the Caribbean, we have this way of talking about people who are bright and those who are not. I have this philosophy that it's just a matter of orientation and exposure.
That's right.
So if somebody who's having difficulty in the classroom, the teacher has to identify what works for that child.
That's right. So that's exactly where we are heading, making our classrooms more student-centered and focusing on the needs of individual students versus trying to teach children as a whole group, moving away from what we call chalk and talk, where the teacher stands as the expert in the room and just disseminates information, and the children are expected to be like sponges and soak it all up in the same way, at the same time, at the same speed.
And then spit it back out.
Or models of education show that does not work. And so we have to take a different look at education and provide what students need, meet students where they are, differentiate, which is a big buzzword in the field, and sort of facilitate instruction so that students are met where they are provided with the type of instruction that meets their learning needs versus what the whole group is doing. And that's essentially what moving full steam ahead, which is our mantra for the last 2 years. We want to move education in a different direction. We want to reimagine what education looks like. We want our classrooms to be full of energy and discussion and collaboration and engagement, where the teacher facilitates versus the teacher standing at the front of the room and acting as an expert, where children get the opportunity to question and sort of challenge the teacher's position, developing their communication skills and all of that.
Well, I like the colleague who was a bit before her time. When she had her students surrounding her in the classroom, engaged with the activity, her headmistress said, "You're not controlling your class."
Grace, I remember being at Montserrat Secondary School, and the classes that I remember most were those, in fact. I remember in second form, we had a particular, his name was Mr. Weeks. I can't remember I don't know his first name. He was Mr. Weeks.
He did French?
Yes. And his classes were not, he didn't stand there right on the board. We had conversations, and he's teaching us French, and he taught us history also, but we were talking about everything else, what's going on in the courthouse, what's going on in Caricom, all kinds of things. And that has so stuck in my brain. And I remember my mother was a teacher, all and that she was the same. And that was her thing, allowing us to question and challenge. My mother was the one, if I'd ask, "Mommy, what does this word mean?" in the dictionary, and then I'd have to come and tell her the synonyms and the connotations and things like that.
Now we send the children to Google.
There you go. One question I want to ask you both, because in Montserrat, I have a particular challenge with some of the education, the way education is handled in Montserrat at the primary and especially the secondary level. Because I also believe, and I get this from my mother and just from being in classes, where just how life works. People work together with the different skills, if you want, the ones who are bright, quote unquote, not so bright or better in one subject or the other. And what happens in Montserrat is that they are separated. There's a system which I got fired from the government some years ago because I talked about it. You can't separate. They had something called the pre-vocational program. And if you can't read and write so good, if you're not the one to sit on the book, they cut you off to pre-vocation. You're going to do work with your hands. But of course, we know that because children
education.
Exactly. It has to do with education, how being able to sense and to follow and to support children with their particular modes and speeds, if you will, of development. And so the in Montserrat, where you have set 1, 2, 3, and 4, and I am told children are going to secondary school in set 3 or set 4, and they don't need. I remember one particular time a parent said to me, "Miss Osborne, can you help me with this? Because my child's going to first form, and I'm asking for a book list, textbook list, and they tell she won't need. I can't remember, boy or girl won't need a list because they won't be using textbooks, and which makes no sense because the bright ones going to set 1, going to set 2, they're not so, and then literally, and so you have children apart from the academic issues, they're the whole self-esteem and confidence and so on that's supposed to be nurtured in school, because school is not just academic. All that gets, to my mind, gets ignored and it's harmful. How do you do it in the Virgin Islands? And then Grace, tell me what you think about how they do it in Montserrat.
So you're just for clarity, this happens at the end of primary going into secondary.
Yes.
Okay, so we don't have, and how is it determined what set they would be in? How is that determined?
There's some kind of
test.
Yeah,
there's a test, like a big high stakes exam. So we got rid of our high stakes exam a few years ago. I think I want to say it was about 2014. And so we use a continuous assessment, a balanced assessment model that includes in-class assessments, which can be student-generated tests. We do projects, book reports, presentations, along with the standard paper and pencil assessments as well. And all those are put together to determine the students' performance. When students get into secondary school, they are, I wouldn't say streamed, but they are tracked a little according to their math scores. And we are restarting that recently because, and I'm sure it's the same in Montserrat because it's a global pandemic now. The new pandemic is the poor performance of students in mathematics since the pandemic of 2019. And so that's part of our strategy to address student needs, because we find them coming in with varying needs, and so when they're grouped, we can address those needs, but they're not grouped for every subject. And it is, and the students don't know that, by and large, they don't know that one group. I mean, over time you would hear them saying certain things, but it is not, it doesn't carry that kind of the badge that I know in the past. We had a system before when I was in school. We had 1-1, 1-2, 1-3. So the bright students went into those classes, and the high stakes exam, the one sitting high stake exam, determined your fate. So if you were sick on that day, if you came with a headache, if you didn't have a good breakfast, if you had test anxiety, then you fell behind and you didn't. So yeah, we don't use that model anymore. We do have, interestingly enough, persons in the community advocating for us to go back to that. But just like you said before, education is about more than academics. And one of the things that I believe wholeheartedly is that content is at the tip of everybody's finger. And so what we need to be focusing on is how we teach our children to collaborate, how we teach them to develop their character. Because no matter how bright you are, if you can't work with people, if you can't be corrected, if you can't get along in a group, if you don't know how to manage your emotions, what you have in your head is irrelevant. And so school has to evolve to be more about building character and teaching children to be good citizens of the communities that they live in. And all of that, we believe, is embedded in the approach that we are taking to education.
Yes, I agree. Grace?
If we can just step back a bit and look at the history of education in the Caribbean. We can't ever forget our colonial past, the history of enslavement, and the fact that education first started with the churches and that Bible that was specially developed for the enslaved. Then you moved on to the 3 R's. And then in terms of going on to secondary education, only those who could afford to pay were allowed access to secondary education. So in my time, the government tried to make a few scholarships available for those persons who might not have been able to pay for their schooling. So I got one of those, what they were called exhibition scholarships, because I had 2 sisters ahead of me. So asking my parents to pay for a third, that just wasn't going to happen. And later on, everybody, you talk about the 11 plus, everybody was allowed to secondary education. What I realized happened with that qualifying exam for secondary school prior to the 11 plus was that it meant that everybody who got into secondary school were more or less on the same level and didn't present too much of a problem for the teacher in the classroom. That is not happening today. The teacher in the classroom is faced with students from, so we have a diverse community now. We have people from Haiti, we have people from Santo Domingo, Jamaica, and so on. We have people who, youngsters, children who have never been to school before. And they're expected to go into school with people who have been in school all along. And that reminds me of my experience when I was in BVI, 96 to 97. I was working in the library. And I very often saw people working with individual students in the library. And I said, why are they not in school? And it was explained to me that the education department did not allow people to just get into the school system just like that. They had to start for a whole year. Am I correct, Olandette?
I'm not familiar.
Okay, but basically they were not allowed to just go into the classroom and disrupt the classroom because they're not ready. They had to find some way of being brought up to the level of the class that they were going into. So my heart bleeds for the teachers in Montserrat right now with the problems that they experience in the classroom with students with Well, I know that there will be students who may be good at one thing, but may need help in another. Various things are being tried. You have the pupil support unit, and I know that started years ago with Dr. Tuitt.
Mm-hmm. So Grace, let me ask you something. Let me ask you and all on that something then. So the idea of universal education, everybody having an equal shot, we all love that. That is how it should be. That would be really, really wonderful if it could work.
And if you have resources, you have to put the resources. Do you have trained teachers?
There you go. So what are the resources that we need? Because bear in mind also that our picture of what education should be cannot now only be academic education. The notion that being a good plumber or a good electricity, being an electrician requires physics. I passed my physics O-level and I thought, enough of that. It requires real brains. But we have this notion electrician, and if you're doing construction, you have to know about measurements and proportions and I don't know, all the stuff you need to, how much cement is going to carry what weight and so on. Right. So these are things that require intellectual applications, but we consider them for the ones that are not so smart. What can we do to even out? Well, I think I'm answering the question. It's not a question.
Actually, those are life skills. Why would you tell me that I can't do woodwork?
Well, I wanted to do woodwork, but I got to secondary school. Remember when we went to Fort Farm, you had to choose.
You had to do homework
instead. They made me do homework. I wanted to go do woodwork and they said no girls allowed. But the idea is that these things are all very necessary. They also require intellectual capacities, different to reading and so on. But it has to do with skills. So how can we even it out? Do we even it out in school so that people all learn everything they need, or is it a cultural thing that we have to teach our populations that all vocations, all professions are equally important?
I don't understand what the problem is with timetabling, because I'm looking at other countries and how they deal with their education system. Finland, for example, I was following a family, and the young chap at age 17 graduated and was able to build a house. And they have no exams until like maybe age 15. No exams whatsoever. Whereas we stress our students out with exams every minute.
Yes.
And they're actually looking at the whole person in terms of development, your social skills, your critical thinking skills, all of that. All of those things are addressed. But guess what? To work in the Finnish education system, you have to be highly trained, and they pay you well. Right. But in our systems, I again, my heart bleeds for the kind of salary a teacher gets.
So this takes me to something that's on my mind. Let me just remind our listeners here. I am speaking with Orlandet Crabbe, who is the acting chief education officer from the Virgin Islands, and with Grace Castle, who's the head of the UE Open Campus site in Montserrat. We're talking about education in the region, in our territories and in the region. When I think of education, one of the things I think about, we are designated developing countries, underdeveloped countries, etc. You know the drill. We are third world, all that stuff. Now, in order to take our place, whatever place we decide within the world nowadays, there's some things that are required. We need to know some things. And to my mind, a lot of this has to be driven by leadership. Before we go into another question I want to ask, let me ask you, are our education systems preparing us to lead in the 21st, 22nd, 23rd century? Are we?
I don't think so.
Well, for us, I believe that we recognize that our system was not producing what our territory needed. And that was the driving force behind us having needing to reimagine the way we do things in education in the Virgin Islands. That's the driving force. We need to produce what the citizens that the territory needs to take it from where it is to where we want it to be. And that begins and ends with the education system. We produce the future leaders. We produce the future politicians, the future electricians, the plumbers, and all of those. And just to go back to that question, for us in the Virgin Islands, after Hurricane Irma and Maria in 2017, we recognized that the skilled workers, we didn't have enough to rebuild the country. We didn't have enough. And so that is where you found a lot of the stigma attached to those professions began to be eradicated, because the skilled workers could charge anything because they were in such high demand. We have a technical school on the island that is a very new school, but we are hoping to have it developed to produce students, or to allow students who have those technical inclinations to allow them to develop the skills that they need, in those fields, and to help to build our own local population of skilled workers.
Yeah. Grace, let me ask you, this was probably around about 2017, I was in a meeting in St. Kitts, and we had 3 professors from University of the West Indies talking to the Commonwealth women parliamentarians about leadership in the region, specifically women's leadership, political leadership. But then we got, of course, in the conversation, we got into just the idea of general leadership. And one of the things that we had actually considered doing, and then of course politics got in the way, because politics, we changed so much in the region that, but the idea was, one of the things we came away from that meeting was have conversations with UWI about how we are preparing, or are we, and you and I had this conversation, we've asked ourselves these questions before, are our regional tertiary education systems preparing us for that kind of leadership in our region? Schools prepare us in terms of character and discipline and so on to do the work, but specific leadership skills, are we being intentional enough about that? Are we even looking at that, or are we just kind of going by the seat of our pants like we've done before? And can it still work?
As I said earlier, I tend to watch what's happening in a society, and I have come away with the understanding that our history is affecting us even today. Just last Thursday, there was a professorial lecture given by Corinne Bailey at Cayville. It was entitled Post-Colonial Reflections on the Regional Crime Problem. And that's, you can Google that, UWI-TV, Corinne Bailey, Bailey, Post-Colonial Reflections on the Regional Crime Problem, and you'll find it. And he said several things that I think we need to think about this evening. He spoke about the consequences of colonial rule. And he says post-colonial is not just a historical moment in time, but it's a process that is having ongoing effects. He says Caribbean society continues to struggle with the long-term impacts of imperialism. Ideally, we should have been reclaiming identity and agency now, but he says, how can that be possible when you still live with a philosophy of oppression and exclusion? We are let down by the institutions left by the post-colonial system.
But Grace,
the institutions left, continue the structural inequalities in the society. So, for example, education is about maintaining standards so people do well and they can progress in life and so on. Because we all agree that education for the Caribbean has been important in terms of upward mobility.
Yes.
It's inextricably linked with social status. But the thing is, it's skewed to the people who have resources. So those children whose parents are considered, I don't like to say rich, but a little bit better off, tend to do well. Am I wrong?
No, it still is the case. I mean, it still is very much the case. But if we're talking about, before we get to that though, there is, to me, my recollection and my preference, if I had one, were to believe that there are segments. There are segments in our acculturation and in the ways that we live that change as we go, that affect these things. And I say that, for example, because I remember, again, being in secondary school, and there's a lot people coming back from UE. People are coming back from UE with a very strong, powerful sense of being Caribbean, being West Indian, being having agency and ownership. And somehow, though, in these years, these last 20, 30 years, we have lost that. Why has that happened? Has that been education? Good education?
I've seen that happen. You go through a period when you see people are changing, thinking, the thinking is a bit more progressive, and then all of a sudden you find yourself back, maybe even further back than you were before.
Yeah, but I'm sorry. I think the answer to that is part of what you read earlier. There are structures within or contexts in the Caribbean that tire you out. They make it so hard for you. So you come back with this progressive way of thinking. You're going to change. You're going to do this. These things have to change. But there are some structures, some antiquated, archaic structures in the Caribbean context within education, both from all segments of the sector, that kind of make it's so difficult to break through those barriers.
So basically, I've been thinking that we all have to go through some kind of counseling. The whole society, Caribbean society, we need some kind of counseling that helps us to understand what it is that is causing our behavior. Because
so we get back to education. We do it in the schools. Do we have to include it in our syllabi? Do we have to do that?
It could be in schools. It has to be everywhere, because it's not just children. It's affecting adults as well. Because take, for example, people who work very hard and were considered successful. Do you know what they decided? They didn't want their children to work as hard.
Yeah. Great.
And now we have some, what I call mamby-pamby people coming up to work in our.
Let's talk about the namby-pamby.
Help me to understand what that means. No. I have no context whatsoever. Help me to understand.
Y'all people.
Okay, I got you now.
Okay, so here's a question for you, because let me know if this is true. The general thinking, I think, around the region is that the others of us are sort of more British oriented, but you are so close, Virgin Islands, so close to the US, and I know a lot of you people actually go to the US to school, whereas most of us had either gone to England. I mean, I got sent off to England to school. Has that, and I asked you this because let me give you a quick story here. I came home one year, I was living in the US. I came home and my friend's son, who was then probably 7 or 8 years old, I said I was going to the beach, and I said, "Do you want to come with me?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "Do you want to?" And before he could answer, his parents said, "Yeah, he's going." And I said, "No, you want to come?" And the father said, "Shirley, this is Montserrat." I said, he goes. Okay. So there's a certain level of management and control of how our children grow up, are trained, that we all believe the Americans do not do. Has that had an effect on your education system or the way your children grow up, all in that?
Well, because of our geographic location and because of social media and all of that, you find those parenting styles are infiltrating our local context, where children have more of a say. As an educator, I believe that children should be spoken with and not spoken to. Children should have the right to express themselves and to tell you when they don't like what you've done. And so that's the way I've raised my children. However, in my generation, I couldn't tell my mother, "Hi, Mom." I couldn't tell my mother, "I don't like when you talk to me like that." And so you find, I don't know that it's embedded in the education system, but it definitely has an impact on it, because these children who are being raised to express themselves come into classrooms with teachers, and they have to, that's how they communicate. So they want to express themselves. They want to say, teacher, I don't like that, or no, teacher, and so you find a challenge there. You find that can be a challenge depending on the teacher's perspective. So I don't know that the American influence in that way has affected our school system, but it definitely has affected the students through social media and so on and so forth. The US system, because our students go all over the world. We have students who go to the UK. We have students in the US that I think maybe where the greater population of our students go off to for their tertiary education. But we also have a great population of students who go to the Caribbean. They go to UE. They go to Grenada, to St. George's, yes. So we have students within the region, and so we find ourselves as a system trying to make sure that we prepare children so that they're successful no matter where they go.
But the whole idea of the management and control of the way our parents, you keep quiet, you're going to be seen as it comes back to
the plantation system.
Exactly, Grace. That's what I'm talking about. It comes back to that. So that's also something we have to find the balance between.
So that's where the counseling comes in, Miss Grace. Yeah, that's where the counseling comes in, because what you are in a part of a system where you feel that you don't have any control, and so you want to control your children because there's very little as people that you have control over. You want to control your children, but that is counterproductive, because what we need are children who are leaders who think outside the box, who aren't afraid to express themselves, who aren't afraid to challenge the status quo, to say this is not working. Why are we doing this? Not because we've been doing it for 20 years. Look at the data. We have to change the way we do things. And that comes about from the way we interact with our children. And what we allow them to say to us, even as little children. Can they express themselves, or do we want them to shut up when they feel sad? Don't cry. You beat them and say, I don't want to hear anything.
That's out to you. Yes.
Yeah. But I definitely think that is linked to those colonial practices and us. These are the remnants of slavery, the impact that it has had on us, even though we are so far removed from it.
Yeah.
In fact, I remember my nephew at age 5. He was so excited about going to primary school. And at the end of the week, I said, so how was it? He said, it takes so long till break time. What does that tell you? He's bored during the class.
Bored during the class, exactly. We're still educating for the industrial age. We're still educating for children to sit, to walk around factories and sitting in front of desks. There are a couple of questions coming in. One of them is asking about AI. Again, becoming one of the criticisms I've heard about our region, and I heard it of Montserrat specifically because that's kind of a lot of my focus, but I hear it throughout the rest of the region that we are not using technology, information technology enough in our development. Can the two of you tell me about this? I know UE has open campus, which means that they're doing some of that. But in general, how are we doing? How are you doing in the Virgin Islands? And I know Grace and I admit, we acknowledge we're not doing nearly as well in Montserrat.
Do you remember when some years back, laptops were made available for secondary school children?
Yes, and then they stopped.
I remember seeing 2 boys on the lamppost one evening, surfing the web. Yeah. And I thought, fantastic idea. But then when those things became obsolete, there were no replacements.
That was it. Yeah.
So it's always a question of resources. It seems.
Resources, yeah.
And the other thing too is that they put these things into the classrooms, but the teachers are not prepared
to use them.
Yes. Basically, some of them were not even computer literate. The teachers.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we're back to this thing of training, and it's a whole multitude of issues that need to be addressed.
Right.
We tend to come with solutions, but don't look at all the links.
But it has to be a strategic approach to addressing. So we can't move away from technology. And if you think of a baby now, a year and months too, they take up a phone, you see them swiping their hand from left to right. They know what to do to open the phone and so on. And so the children are telling us that if we want to reach them, we have to infuse technology into education. And we have been, that has been part of our mandate. Coming out of the pandemic, the pandemic forced it. We didn't have an option. If we wanted school to continue, it had to be done online. And so it would be remiss of us to do away with it after the pandemic. And one of the things that we have insisted in the Virgin Islands is that the virtual classrooms that we developed during the pandemic are maintained. So in addition to students attending face-to-face, you have virtual classrooms where the information is shared. And as a parent, you can go in and see what the teacher taught for the day, what the assignments are, and so forth, so on and so forth. We also have smart boards throughout our system, smart boards in classrooms. The big thing is training, and I wish my ICT officer was here to talk about how the teachers are afraid of technology. But what do? We can't throw up our hands. We have to strategically provide the scaffolding that our teachers need, because it's not going away. And the further away we get from technology, the more issues, behavioral and otherwise, we find in our classrooms, because we aren't meeting our students' needs. We have to give our teachers what they need so that they can give the students what they need. There's a book, I think it is, that says you have to feed the teachers so they don't eat the students. So you have to provide the teachers with the skills that they need so that they can meet the students where they are and give the students the quality, the type of education that they need in today's society.
Now it's my time to put in a plug for UE.
Go ahead, go right ahead.
You mentioned the pandemic. So during that whole lockdown period, the Open Campus was delivering training for teachers so that they could use the technology.
Yes. We took advantage of a lot of that in the Virgin Islands.
But the other thing that he did, I mean, I'm one of the rare people who say thank God for the pandemic, because the transitioning of a lot of face-to-face programs to online made it possible for Montserrat to have access to a lot of short courses.
Okay.
And I'm going to tell you, it has been a joy to see the enthusiasm with which people are doing these short courses, and they're asking, so when's the next one? What else is there for us to do? And I know of a chap who did upholstery online. And he said it cost him a lot. The actual tuition cost was not a lot, but you had to buy the materials. So this happened at the time when the boat was no longer running, so he had to take a flight to Antigua to buy materials. So I think he said he spent a couple thousands to prepare for this this class. But now he's offering a service, and I'm really pleased, because here is somebody who strengthens his skills and now has a sideline.
Right.
Yeah.
And other people are doing things like floral decoration, balloon art, and interior decorating, and so on. So I'm looking forward to seeing the positive impact of those in the society, because Shirley and I were talking about the creative and cultural industries. People in the developed world have written, about the fact that the Caribbean has a competitive advantage in that area, and we're sitting back and doing nothing.
That's right.
We're still having our little calypso shows at the end of the year. Very few of our calypsonians are registered with the performing rights societies or whatever. So they perform, they come up with a song, they're not earning anything. You understand?
Yeah.
So I'm hoping in the very near future to be able to put on some courses in intellectual property, management, how you can monetize your rights and so on in materials, because these are the things that we need to do.
Yeah. Let me take, and I agree with you, and I think we also, again, we in the Caribbean, we tend to think of creative arts as the thing you do when you're lineman. It's a fun thing. It's not you do for work. It's not something you do for work. If you're lucky to be like Sparrow or somebody who can kind of sort of become a little bit famous, make a little bit of money, good for you, but it's not something you aspire to, because we don't look at it those ways. But let me come to you, Olandette, because I have a question here from the question's gone. So it's in the Virgin Islands, asking about educating teachers and students and so on for using AI, because it seems to me that question fits very nicely in the question of when we're talking about using information technology, we need to educate two groups of people: the students and the people who are teaching them. Because when we think of this, we think, put the computers in the school, put the smart boards. I know they have smart boards in Montserrat, for example.
Yes.
They don't get used very much.
I don't think so.
They don't get used probably because the teachers are not prepared. So what is it we need to do? How do we prepare our students and teachers and the system for the progression of AI? And let me add also how to actually take full advantage of the possibilities offered by information system. This is coming from somebody at Ivan Dawson Primary School.
Hi, Ivan Dawson Primary School. That's one of our schools here in Tortola. So let me tell you a short story. We just recently sent a team of 4 11th graders, 2 teachers, to the first global robotics conference in Singapore, where 190 countries were represented at that event. And the students had to build the organization sends you a kit, and it's a robot in pieces, and you have to build a robot and program it to do certain things. And then you get to the competition, and there are different duels, matches where you have to compete and perform. Those are the kinds. I mean, it was just crazy to see the investment of the students in making sure that their robot did what it was supposed to do. We cannot avoid what is happening in the world, and we cannot act like we don't see that technology is the way to go. We have to embrace it. We have to find the resources to support our teachers. And when you talk about teaching the students, most of the time the students just need time. They'll be the ones teaching us because they're just inclined to use their hands and figure things out. We can't to help our teachers prepare for AI. Artificial intelligence, I think a lot of us were afraid of it. We're afraid that it's going to take over. It's going to take over our jobs.
We're the only ones.
Yeah. I don't see it taking over because the human element can't be outdone. It can augment, it can supplement, it can improve on certain, but I don't see artificial intelligence taking over in the way that it is being purported to be. What we need to do is what I said before. We need to train our teachers because there are benefits and there are cons to artificial intelligence. You need to be aware of what those are so that you can whether include them or be prepared for them as you deal with students in classrooms.
Yeah.
We for example have been using artificial intelligence to check for plagiarism in people's work. But the thing is, ChatGPT apparently has a way around that. So you have to be one ahead of the game. You have to be up with the literature so that students are not getting away with murder.
Intellectual murder. Okay, we are running. We have like 10-12 minutes left. I want to get a couple of things answered. Let me just remind our listeners that we are talking with Greston Castle, who is the head of UE Open Campus in Montserrat, and we're talking to Mrs. Orlando Crabb, who is the acting chief education officer in the Virgin Islands. A question came up just now about special needs.
Yes.
Special education. Talk to me about that. How are we progressing in this area?
Right.
That's about inclusivity.
Right.
In the past, if you had somebody who was sight impaired or hearing impaired, they just stayed home.
Yeah.
And I started by talking about my mother, who was a teacher, but she ended up doing deaf education. So she ended up being a special needs teacher. And in fact, she drummed it in my head. They're not dumb; they're just deaf.
Yeah.
She was able to work with youngsters who eventually integrated into the normal school system. I remember one young lady, she ended up doing typing and so on, and I think she's a success overseas. I had a cousin who was born deaf. His parents promptly sent him off to Canada. He has a totally different life experience from his peers who stayed here.
Yeah.
You understand? So we don't. Our catering for special needs is not as it should be, but we are trying. I mean, Montserrat is trying. They've sent people to train. It's just for those people to actually perform and make a difference in the system.
Right. So we have I would say a well-established unit in our ministry to support the needs of differently able students. We have an officer in the ministry who's committed. That's her portfolio. And we have several special education trained teachers in our system. We have a system where students are provided with intervention at schools. So if they're performing 2 or more grade levels below, they're pulled out and given one-on-one services in their area of need. And then we have students on individualized education plans. We have a school for the severe, those with severe needs. And then we have one of our newest additions to the system. We have recently added what we call a therapeutic kindergarten, where that one school has 2 kindergarten classes where students from 4.5, 5 who present with special needs can come into a school that services the general population. And so they receive services in that class, and eventually they are able to trickle into the regular classrooms. We have a high population of students presenting with autistic-like tendencies. Not all of them have been evaluated, assessed, and so on, but their tendencies, severe increase in that population. And so our unit here has been working with our preschools to help to identify those students early, work with their families, even before they come to the public system, to provide the intervention and services that they need to help them to be successful.
Let me ask you something. Let me ask you both something. I see, like Grace, my mother was a teacher. My mother, her specialty was language, and she did remedial reading, remedial language arts, reading, writing, communicating, speaking, all that stuff. Her style of teaching was she got into people's business. She got into people's lives. She got to people's houses and talked to their mother and their grandmother and pull men off on the street at the rum shop. Come with me, let me talk to you about your daughter. We don't do that anymore in Montserrat, I can tell you, we don't. But we need to do more of that, I think, everywhere. It shows up even in places like United States and in Finland and Sweden and so on, where they have some of the best, the most efficient, if you will, education systems. But I think one of the things that I find challenging is how we separate education from other things. Because we're talking now of issues like autism. There are all kinds of reasons being proffered around the world for why. It has to do with vaccinations and all kinds of things they're thinking have contributed to that. So the idea is that we need to look at the things that help or hinder our children from growing up, being able to take advantage of what we want to be able to offer them. Am I making sense? So let's talk about things like nutrition. So if we're talking about educating our people for development, for the future, we have to talk about how our parents, our mothers and fathers are eating before they get pregnant, while they're pregnant, how we feed children at school and so on. And I have I've had difficulties both in Montserrat and in the United States. I used to work in Arizona, and there was some years ago, they took out the drinks machines. Those machines, you get Coca-Cola and Fanta, they took them out of the schools. And some parents fussed and some said, no, that's good. You see lunch things where they have is lunch and meat. And they go to school and they give them Vienna sausages and so on. What do we need to do through the education system to have people understand that these must be addressed in a holistic way? What do we need to do?
In fact, there's an interesting story on TikTok. There's this woman who's from Russia, living in the US, and she compares her experiences in both spheres. And so she chose to put her children in a Russian school in the US. And she said, why? Because they give them healthy lunches. As opposed to the US system, they don't get healthy lunches.
Yeah.
I want to kind of segue back to the special needs, because you have special needs at the university level as well. So
Grace, just hold it for a second. Let me get from all on that though before, because she brought up the autism issue. How are you dealing with that in a holistic way in the Virgin Islands?
So one of the things that we in education have been pushing for is collaboration among the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Health. Because even before nutrition becomes an issue, you're talking about prenatal care, you're talking about early care, infant care, love and nurturing. You have children whose failure to develop is because they haven't been given the conditions to thrive outside of food, the love and care that they need as infants to be able to thrive, the bonding with their mother and so on and so forth. And so we have been advocating for the two ministries to work together so that we can identify the issues early and work with mothers and families to provide what students need, including nutrition. So I think that's definitely an approach that will work if the ministries, and that's something that I find even among the Caribbean nations, we work in silos, we all have the same issues, but we don't tend to cross paths and use the successes of Montserrat in the Virgin Islands and so on and so forth. And even in ministries within our government, we work in silos. We don't use the expertise. We have the same issues. We look at them from different angles, and rather than looking at them together and developing strategic approaches to and sustainable approaches to solving them, we tend to work individually. So I believe that if we promote collaboration more with health and education, because one of the things I remember one of my mentors used to say is that we've given these children all this education and no health, and they don't live past 40, so there's nowhere for them to use them. And it's true, because we eat so poorly. We eat so poorly in the region now. So, we really need to make sure that our health, that we focus on health. And that too has to be part of education. Children need to learn how to take care of themselves and how what they put in their bodies affect the output. It affects how your brain functions. It affects how alert you are in class. It affects how, it has to be part. Education has to evolve to include all these aspects. And I know when you talk to teachers, they're like, oh, everything is in education, everything. But that's what it is, and we have to look at it from the context of, this is where the children spend all their whole day. This is where they see life happening. This is a microcosm of society. This is where they experience, conflict and social, challenges and so on and so forth. So we have to make sure that the experience that our children get prepares them for the real world.
Yeah, excellent. We have 2 minutes. We have a question here for you, Mrs. Crab, specific. And then Grace, I want you to come in afterwards, because the question here for you, all on that, is there any collaboration currently existing between the Department of Education and We Open Campus, British Virgin Islands? Grace, the same question for you afterwards when she's done, please.
Okay, so at our local community college, we have an Institute of Education. And so our the collaboration would filter through We Open Campus or We at Tallk through the Institute of Education into the Ministry of Education. And so, for example, right now we are running several training programs for teachers. We recently recruited teachers who have a first degree but not in education. And so we have a training, a cohort of teachers being trained, a certificate in education. Through the Institute of Education. So we have collaborations, but they are filtered through our local institute.
Okay, thank you. Grace, how does it work in Montserrat?
In fact, we are currently looking at developing a training program for the teachers in the primary as well as secondary school who are not trained. Mm-hmm. You have teachers who have degrees who will most likely benefit from a diploma in education program, and then you have others who have neither a first degree in this subject specialization, nor any teacher training. So we've turned to the Mona campus, the School of Education in Mona, to develop something that will work for Montserrat.
Okay. All right, ladies. I wish we had another hour to talk. There's so much because education is so basic.
Actually, I want to just jump in and say one thing.
Go right. You have 30 seconds.
While I was in the library, we would encourage pregnant mothers to be to read to the baby. Start borrowing books for the baby and read to the baby. So you start in the education process even before the baby arrives.
Yeah. I think we should do it in music too. And so thank you, ladies, very, very, very much. It's been a really good conversation. I look forward to doing some more of this. Again, for our listeners, we've been talking with Mrs. Olandette Crabb, who is the Acting Chief Education Officer in the Virgin Islands, and with Gracelyn Castle, who is the head of UE Open Campus Montserrat. Thank you all very, very, very much. We've talked about education in the region, and we all agree that there's a lot of work to be done. We recognize the importance of education. We're interested in education for the sake of education and also for the sake of our development, questions like leadership and all those other things that are attached, because we're also working to create in the region the most successful, the best, right? That's a goal. So thank you all very, very much. Thank you to our media partners. I can't remember them all right now, but Barbados, CBC, Channel 8, Radio Saba, PJFE 93.9, Radio Montserrat, ZJB. Is moving so fast, I can't see them all, but thank you ever so much. And Cayman Marl Road, Radio TCI, Turks and Caicos. Thank you all very, very much, and have you have a wonderful evening. My other co-hosts who have not been on screen tonight, Shaina Smith of the Virgin Islands and Chris Famous of Bermuda. Thank you all very much. Have a wonderful night, everyone. We'll talk again soon, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Bye-bye.